After India's independence in 1947, the country faced a truly massive challenge. How do you build a modern economy pretty much from scratch? The old colonial system had left the economy stagnant, so the task was to transform it into something new, something progressive. This is the story of that four-decade journey, from 1950 to 1990, where India set out to write its own economic destiny through a system of centralized planning. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start by looking at the new economic path India decided to take. Then, we'll dive into the huge changes in agriculture and industry. And finally, we'll step back and take a hard look at the results of this 40-year experiment.
All right, let's start at the very beginning. Right after independence, India's leaders had a fundamental choice to make. Which economic path should this new nation walk?
At that time, the world was really divided into two big economic camps. You had capitalism on one side, where private companies call the shots based on what the market wants, and on the other side you had socialism, where the government controls everything to meet what it sees as society's needs. India was standing at a crossroads, trying to figure out which of these very different roads to take. But instead of picking one side, India decided to carve out its own path, a middle way. This was the mixed economy model. The big idea was to try and get the best of both worlds, creating a system where the government and private businesses could work side by side to build the nation. Now, how do you steer a massive, complex economy like this? Well, the tool India chose was centralized planning. A plan is really just a detailed blueprint. It lays out how the country's resources, everything from money to manpower, should be used over a specific period to hit certain targets. And this whole concept of five-year plans, it was heavily inspired by the model used in the former Soviet Union.
Every one of these five-year plans was built on four central pillars. Think of them as the guiding principles for everything: growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. Together, these four goals were supposed to be the engine for India's economic transformation.
One of these ideas, growth with equity, was especially important. It meant that just growing the country's GDP, the total economic output, wasn't the whole story. The real goal was to make sure that the benefits of that growth actually reached the poorest and most disadvantaged people in society. It wasn't just about making the economic pie bigger, it was about making sure everyone got a fairer slice.
So that's the theory. But how do these plans actually get put into practice? Let's turn to what was then India's most critical sector, agriculture, and see how it was supposed to go from being stuck in the past to being self-sufficient.
Back then, land ownership was incredibly unequal. So, to fix this, the government rolled out major land reforms. The guiding idea was land to the tiller. This had two main parts. First, they abolished the middlemen, the zamindars, which instantly put over 200 lakh, that's 20 million farmers, in direct contact with the government. Second, they introduced a land ceiling, a law that set a limit on how much land one person could own.
But, making the law is one thing, making it work is another. The big landlords fought back. They challenged the laws in court, causing huge delays. They also found all sorts of clever loopholes, like transferring land to their relatives to get around the ceiling. So in the end, except for a few states like Kerala and West Bengal, the land reforms never really achieved what they were supposed to.
The next big thing that happened in agriculture was a complete game changer, and it was all about technology, the Green Revolution. This was all about introducing new high-yielding variety, or HYV seeds. But here's the catch. These miracle seeds only worked if you gave them the whole package deal. Plenty of water, fertilizers, and pesticides. The result, though, was stunning. For the first time, India became self-sufficient in food grains, no more depending on imports to feed its people.
Now, the Green Revolution also kicked off a massive debate about subsidies. On one side, people argued that subsidies were absolutely necessary. How else could you convince poor farmers to take a risk on this new, expensive technology? But on the other side, critics pointed out that these subsidies were a huge drain on the government's budget, and that most of the benefits were going to already well-off farmers and big fertilizer companies.
Okay, let's switch gears. We've talked about agriculture. Now let's look at the strategy for industry and trade, which was all about one thing: building a strong, self-reliant industrial base right here in India.
The absolute cornerstone of this industrial strategy was something called the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956. It basically said that the government would control the commanding heights of the economy. Industries were split into three groups. The first group was only for the government. The second could have both government and private players, but the government would always take the lead. And the third group was what was left for the private sector. Even the private sector was kept on a very tight leash through a system that got a famous, or maybe infamous, nickname: the permit license Raj. Basically, you needed a government license for almost everything, starting a company, making more of your product, or even making a new type of product. The idea was to spread industry across the country, but it ended up creating a mountain of red tape and bureaucracy.
When it came to trade with the rest of the world, India looked inwards. The policy was called import substitution, and the logic was really simple. Instead of buying things from other countries, let's make them ourselves, right here at home. This was all about shielding India's new and growing industries from tough foreign competition.
So how did they build this protective wall? Mainly with two tools. First, tariffs, which are just taxes slapped on imported goods to make them more expensive. And second, quotas, which put a hard limit on how much of a certain product you could even bring into the country. Together, these things were designed to keep foreign goods out and give Indian companies room to grow.
So, after 4 decades of this planned approach, what was the verdict? What worked and what didn't? It's time for a critical look back at this whole era. If we look at the scorecard, it's a really mixed bag. On the plus side, there were some huge wins. India built a diverse industrial sector, it finally became self-sufficient in food, and a lot of small-scale industries grew. But all of this came with some serious downsides. Many of the big government-owned companies were inefficient, the license Raj was often used to kill competition, and because of protectionism, Indian customers were often stuck with poor quality products in a market with no choices. All right, to pull all of this together and make sure we've really got a handle on it, let's think about a few key questions.
Really take a moment to think about these. What was the real, long-term impact of the Green Revolution, both good and bad? In practice, what does growth with equity actually look like? And why was that idea of self-reliance so non-negotiable for India in those early days? Answering these questions for yourself isn't just about passing an exam. It's about building a solid foundation to understand the huge economic changes that were just around the corner. Thinking through these connections is absolutely key.